Welcome, welcome, welcome to the first regular season edition of the 3 Down Nation podcast in 2025. Fellas, the season is upon us. If you can't tell, I'm jacked and excited by my voice. How pumped up are you boys for some real Canadian 3 Down professional football?
I'm just bummed the preseason is done. Preseason football is the best football. Regular season, it's in the name. It's regular. It's normal. It's average. I want preseason back. Let's go.
You're really craving those 2-and-outs from guys who don't make the final roster.
Hey, JC, Tucker Horn's like, take your 2-and-outs and shove it, bro.
That's
I'm making
true.
this roster in the preseason. Shut your yap over there.
D3 stepping up, Tucker Horn. Trinity University legend, not Trinity College. Those are two different schools, by the way.
You know who Tucker Horn has a relationship with?
No, who?
One Dre McCray.
Oh, interesting.
Couple of preseason stars for the boys.
For the record, I thought the first preseason game, the one that was like really early in training camp between BC and Calgary, was awful, which is understandable given how early it was.
Bad.
After that, I thought all of the preseason action I watched, with like some exceptions late in the game, was good. Like, this could be a really positive sign of things to come. Like, I thought both the Saskatchewan-Winnipeg games I covered, like the first one didn't even have a touchdown, but it was still very watchable. The second one was even better. Like, there were legitimate plays made across the board in all these games. There were points. I legitimately enjoyed, aside from the first one, the preseason action that I watched. I caught at least a piece of all of the games. I caught all of some of the games. And so I'm very excited about the regular season. I think we're on a good trajectory. Hopefully that continues into week 1 and beyond.
Let's jump into it, boys. Our 3 Down Nation power rankings are going to be one of our focuses today.
We're also talking about potential breakout players for 2025.
As well as my own CFL Team 10, made up of recent final cuts.
Don't call them the Atlantic Schooners just yet. Mariel Alford keeping his job in Saskatchewan.
And Chad Kelly being cleared for practice. But first,
all 9 CFL teams have made post-training camp cuts. Edmonton released former West Division All-Star. Yes, I'm saying West Division All-Star, not all West Division. I hate it. Alexander Hollins, as first reported by 3nowNation.com. And Toronto let go Cameron Dukes, plus veteran running back Kadeem Carey, also first reported by 3nowNation.com. Montreal cut running back Walter Fletcher and defensive back Bryce Cosby. Saskatchewan chopped veteran linebackers, Canadians as well, Justin and Jordan Herdman-Reed. Hamilton snipped Canadian receiver Luther Hakanavanu, as did Calgary with quarterback Logan Bonner. Which decision was the biggest, fellas?
I think the biggest surprise here has to be Alexander Hollins getting chopped in Edmonton. And that's not because there aren't some good players on this list. I mean, Kadeem Carey had a fantastic season, I thought, in Toronto last year, helping that team win the Grey Cup. Walter Fletcher obviously had a very good season, catching a ton of passes out of the backfield. Luther Hakanavanu, very serviceable Canadian receiver out in Hamilton, previously with the Calgary Stampeders. But I think it has to be Hollins, simply because after free agency, when Ed Hervey went to the buffet table and took just about everything there was to take, just buying up all the Canadian talent, all of the defensive linemen, all of the offensive linemen who were available, the one thing that he did not have on his plate was a veteran impact receiver. As well noted by, I think, every media outlet in this country, he was not willing to pay Geno Lewis superstar money to come back to the Edmonton Elks. He did, however, pay Keon Julian Grant, very talented Canadian receiver. They still got Curly Gittins Jr. there, making big money, but the American receiver spot was a huge question mark for Edmonton. And the only real veteran they brought in, I mean, they brought in Trey Odoms-Dukes early in camp. He was zipped. The only other guy was Alexander Hollins, who, as Justin noted, has been an all-star in this league. Yes, he had his knees scoped this offseason. He has not been necessarily 100% healthy. But if you go back even just a couple years ago, this is a guy people were talking about as a number one receiver, not just in any CFL offense, but as being the number one receiver, period, league wide, like the best route runner, a guy with for a relatively small frame, had a huge catch radius, was explosive after the catch. And not only did he not stay on with the BC Lions, but he's now been zipped by a second team. And it's one that does not have a veteran to replace him right now. So I'm curious to see. We'll talk about it a little bit in our next segment. Young receivers at Edmonton who could potentially step up. But to me, that was the biggest surprise. Even on a sweetheart deal, on a cheap deal, Alexander Hollins cut at Edmonton.
A cheap deal that BC is paying 75 grand for still. So Alexander Holland will be on the street still cashing a paycheck for this season because of what happened prior to that. I think it's a remarkable fall from grace for Hollins, or a chaotic tumble, if you will, going from an all-star level player in 2023 to starting the 2024 season on absolute fire. He was on a 2,000-yard pace until he started to get nicked up and struggle with those drops, and then it just fell off a cliff. The injury situation, the release, the arbitration with the CFLPA grievance, getting the money, potentially coming back to BC, that falling apart, going to Edmonton, and now being cut again. I think in terms of players who have had a chaotic last 2 years, it's Chad Kelly and then Alexander Hollins. There is nobody else in the same category in terms of the number of storylines and the number of occurrences that have changed and altered their career during that span. But I think we need to focus on the running backs a little bit here, because I get a lot of flack on this podcast, gentlemen, for saying that running backs don't matter. But I would like the record to state that 2 CFL teams just said that running backs don't matter, because Kadeem Carey was an East Division All-Star last year, a 1,000-yard back.
Hold up. They're not saying they don't matter.
Count.
They're saying they got somebody better, or a couple.
They're not
better.
willing to pay the old heads for it. That's the
what are you
whole
talking
principle
about?
of running backs don't matter.
But they did pay the old heads. They re-signed. Like you, my friend, you and Chris Morris should start the false equivalency club, because Chris Morris is out here saying, "Oh, our name changed, therefore all of our history was stripped away." It's like, actually, Mr. President, if you feel like your team history was stripped away, that is on your team. The name changing has nothing to do with the rich history of all these Grey Cup championships and all these wonderful players. So if you think that the release of Kadeem Carey, maybe it just means they have better running backs. You ever think of that? Maybe they just have better guys.
Running backs are so important. We're going to pay guys not to play for us. That, to me, that
Alexander
logic doesn't
Hollins
track.
got paid not to play. Does that mean receivers don't matter?
It's a little bit different with the injury situation. But my point with Carey and with Fletcher, these are 2 dynamic starting running backs, right? An East Division All-Star and a 1,000-yard guy in Carey. And Walter Fletcher was, I think, extremely underrated last season. Over 700 yards rushing and over 700 yards receiving. I got a lot of flack on social media last year when I said he was the best receiving back in the CFL, and a lot of people came back at me and said, "No, Brady Oliveira is the best receiving back in the CFL." Brady Oliveira is the best back in the CFL. Walter Fletcher had more receiving yards last year. He was more dynamic out of the backfield, more consistent out of the backfield, and that's not taking anything away from Brady Oliveira. And both of these guys are now on the street. It's going to open up the room for a couple of unknowns. We're not quite sure who's going to get the starting gig in either city. Will it be Stevie Scott III or Travis Teese in Montreal? Will it be Mayon Williams or Deontay McMahon, as he'd like his name to be pronounced, in Toronto? Whoever steps up there is going to be one of the emerging stars in the CFL, because running backs, whoever they are, inevitably get a lot of touches.
JC on point with the pronunciations. And let's get this money story straight, okay? Walter Fletcher signed a 2-year extension in December, which included a $17,500 signing bonus. Kadeem Carey signed a 1-year extension with the Argos, which included a $20,000 signing bonus. And JC, you take so much flack for this. We're going to beat on you a little bit here more. I just think that there were younger players that beat these guys out. Like, it wasn't necessarily a
It's almost
surprise.
like there's an abundance of running backs available, and you can just cycle through them whenever you want. I don't know who's been saying that for years.
They got to come in and perform. So I don't think it was a surprise to people who had watched training camp with the Argos closely, because Carey had, let's call it, limited reps, and Mayan Williams looks really good. I'm not even, going to jump into some of the other factors there, because, Corey Mace had a quote. He was asked about the release of Carey and said he's a happy-go-lucky guy. I didn't get the sense, even after he won a Grey Cup and was celebrating it, that he wasn't a happy-go-lucky guy, okay? He took his aim and pointed it right at the Calgary Stampeders out of nowhere. So I'm curious to see if he does play CFL football again in 2025. May seems to be sure about it. He crossed over with him during his time with the Calgary Stampeders. I think the real intriguing guy here is Walter Fletcher. I do believe there are teams that have already checked in to see if he would be interested in joining them. And I think it's for that versatility that JC mentioned. The fact that he's still only 28 years old, like Kadeem Carey is well into his 30s, and he's a solid to really good pass protector as well. So I think Walter Fletcher is definitely a name to keep an eye on. A lot of people are going to say Kadeem Carey as well, and I get it. If there's some injuries, that might make sense. But a lot of these teams are coming out of training camp with younger running backs who have been in their respective playbooks longer. So nothing, guys, really surprises me. The one thing that I do want to talk about is how fans are shocked and then get upset about players being released and then say, well, we can't follow the team. But, like, how are you ever going to have new, younger, exciting talent come into the league? Like, this is just the natural evolution of football. And for those that don't understand, it's a young man's game. Kadeem Carey is well into his 30s. I'm not saying he still can't get it done, but when you have a guy who looks great like Chop Williams in the preseason, I don't understand how fans can't make that connection there. That you're talking about getting a guy who's like, what, almost a decade younger in there, or some blood that is substantially younger in there, depending who the Argos go with. So I wasn't necessarily surprised by any of this. And on Alexander Hollins, I'll say this, and then we can move on. I had one veteran, very respected personnel man tell me, well, he's not that great of a player. That about said it all to me.
I will say, and not that I want to harp on running backs again, but the only thing that bothers me about the running back narrative, and yes, it happened with 2 of 9 teams, which isn't an inconsiderable number. I get that. But when Nick Anderson takes over the league last year and is a dominant force at linebacker, literally nobody says, oh, teams are so stupid for paying all this money for Jameer Thurman or Wynton McManus when you could just go grab a Nick Anderson. Like, this is so silly. And yet we do it with running backs. I don't understand why. There's maybe a little more turnover at running back, but that's because running backs get the pulp beaten out of them over the course of a season and a career. Like, let's give an example. Cameron Dukes started more games for Toronto than any other Argonauts quarterback last year. He started 9 regular season games. Nick Arbuckle, Grey Cup MVP, started 1. Chad Kelly started 8. I'm talking about the regular season. But still, even if you include the postseason, the guy who started the most games is still Cameron Dukes. And he's not with the Argonauts anymore. And it's because Tucker Horn, D3 legend, beat him out. And nobody is standing here saying, wow, well, teams are pretty stupid for paying quarterbacks when you could just go and pluck a Tucker Horn at a D3. Like, that narrative never, ever, ever gets shared except for when it's a running back, which I think is a bunch of BS, to be quite frank. I should correct myself slightly. The Elks did add, as a late addition, Stephen Dunbar Jr. So they do have 1 veteran American receiver. The other 2 guys they've got are Arkell Smith. This is on the active roster. Arkell Smith, who played 5 games last year, and Benjamin Victor, a big-bodied receiver out of Ohio State, had a cup of coffee with the Baltimore Ravens in the UFL, but doesn't really have any pro production. So obviously the Elks are high on Victor if they were willing to part ways with Alexander Hollins, but still, that's something I'm going to be interested to watch in Edmonton is who is in that starting receiving core and how quickly are they able to develop chemistry with Trey Ford and Cody Fajardo in order to be productive, because I think we know the Elks are going to run the ball well. Of course you are, with Steven Sorrell's there, who's still a big part of that offense as the run game coordinator. All the offensive linemen up front, they've done a great job of rebuilding that line. They've got a great group of running backs, but receiving wise, you got to be able to pass in this league. So I'm interested to see how the receiving core shakes out there. And if any of these guys pop off, then I'm sorry. I think any CFL team who pays a Kenny Lawler or a Dalton Schoen, like they're all just stupid, because why would you pay all this money for a receiver if you could just go find a Benjamin Victor? It's so I'm smarter than all the GMs. Look at me. I'm so smart. No one else has ever said something so smart. I'm a genius.
The only thing I'll say on the running backs before we move on from this
Wait,
conversation.
Hodge, you forgot a part there. You didn't back it up with the Pro Football Focus stats.
The Pro Football Focus stats. I can't speak for Pro Football Focus. I just know that I'm a genius, because instead of paying lots of money for a good player, I think I can just go find a good player, because apparently it's so easy.
There's just a supply and demand difference with running backs. There's lots of good college running backs. There's not a lot of good college
What do you mean? There's more
quarterbacks.
receivers on the field in college than there are running backs.
But there's
doesn't
also
make any
more
sense.
need. There's more need for receiver in the pros, because you need 5 starting receivers. You only need 1 starting running back, right? So there's a difference in supply and demand at that position. But I digress. I think the other element we need to talk about with these cuts, gentlemen, is some of the names that survived the cuts that maybe we thought were on the bubble. The big one that comes to mind, Mario Alford, the award-winning veteran returner in Saskatchewan. A lot of people thought that Dre McRae was going to take his job. McRae sticks around on the practice roster, but it is Alford returning kicks at least for week 1. And then the other one that I'm interested to hear your thoughts on, Hodge, is Dillon Mitchell, who came in as a signing with the Winnipeg Blue Bombers with a whole lot of hype in terms of a guy who could step into that role to replace Kenny Lawler, and then basically did not run with the starters for a single rep in all of training camp, and now has made the roster anyway and looks set to be a starter in week 1. So does training camp and preseason just not matter at all in terms of where Winnipeg places people? Is Mike O'Shea making a statement there, or is there something else going on?
In terms of Dillon Mitchell, I think you were on point until you said he'll be a starter week 1. I don't think that's a guarantee. They could put him on the 1 game. They could scratch it. The other thing is, of course, we have to remember the team's not necessarily super high priced, but not insignificantly priced running back / returner, Peyton Logan, is not going to be on the roster week 1. He is out. It remains to be seen how bad the injury is, how much time he'll miss. Dillon Mitchell does have some return experience. I think Trey Vavel, rookie defensive back out of Minnesota State, is likely going to get the first opportunity based on the preseason to be the return man. But Dillon Mitchell can fill that role. So I think it remains to be seen. Largely from that standpoint, we have to remember Winnipeg does not play week 1, so they're going to have more time than anybody
That's
to
true.
declare, okay, who's on the 1 game, who's on the 6 game, who's going down to PR. They do have at least 1 open PR spot right now, so maybe they end up demoting somebody before they play their regular season opener. I was frankly surprised that Dillon Mitchell made the team. Talking to people around the league, they're like, if he's running with the 3s and he's playing well into the 4th quarter of preseason games, yeah, kid's not making the team. He did. So clearly the Winnipeg Blue Bombers, I think, value what he showed. I also think the other side of this equation is, frankly, Winnipeg's rookies who they brought in as receivers just didn't necessarily stand out. Myron Mitchell is a guy who was with the team last year just for 4 games. I've never thought Mitchell, and to be clear, I'm talking about Myron Mitchell, was a starter in this league. I didn't feel like he could separate. He ends up getting cut. And then you've also got Jalen Hall, a guy who flashed at times during training camp, talking to other reporters about who could potentially flash. He made 1 really nice catch over the middle in a preseason game, but that play was all Zach Collaros, in my opinion, not Jalen Hall. So I think simultaneously, this is maybe the Bombers wanting to save face a little bit. Let's remember Dillon Mitchell was, I believe, the only player Winnipeg actually physically brought into Winnipeg, like flew to Winnipeg as a free agent addition, doing the full media circus gamut, all that stuff. whereas guys like James Vaughters or the other guys they added in free agency were not brought in. So clearly there was a big pomp and circumstance for Dillon Mitchell. I don't think you want to cut him loose. And also, it's not like keeping him is costing you a blue chip receiver who you thought, wow, this is the next Dalton Schoen. This is the next Kenny Lawler. This is the next Nick Dembski. I don't think that happens. So I think that's why Dillon Mitchell is still around, but remains to be seen, right? It happens every year that week 3, week 4, a veteran in this league gets zipped as somebody beats them out. I think that could still happen if Dillon Mitchell doesn't produce.
I'll lay out the Mario Alford situation because I think at least pointing it out was warranted, even though I've heard that Alford felt a little differently, which I can understand, right? If you feel like the media is talking about your job being on the line and potentially being on the chopping block, anyone might feel some type of way. But you look at the situation. Mario Alford, 34 years old, Dre McCray, 22 years old. I've had people in the league tell me that the Riders have been looking to, let's say, replace Alford for at least a couple of years now. And there is a danger, as Hodge talked about with the Winnipeg return game, to putting McCray on the practice roster. He played 2 preseason games against those Winnipeg Blue Bombers. So if Winnipeg happened to like him enough, they could go pluck him off the practice roster if he agreed to go and put him on the active roster when their season starts in week 2. I would think that would at least have to be a conversation. So I can understand some of why fans want, a replacement for Alford, but there's part of me that can't, because like this guy returned 2 kicks or punts last year for touchdowns. I want to make sure I get it right, that were called back by penalty. And oh, by the way, he's the franchise record holder for most returned touchdowns in Saskatchewan Roughriders history. Like, this guy is still productive, and he's been at least good enough for McCray to go on the record and say that he was helping him get lined up along with other nuances, especially in that first preseason game in Winnipeg, which was McCray's first CFL action. So you're helping the guy that could potentially be taking your job. And I think the point that Hodge said there at the end is well taken, that he's made the roster now, but it's pro football. Like, you're literally competing every day, and especially on game day. So I think if you're the Riders, you're looking at the situation and saying, okay, we have a veteran, proven guy who we know still has the juice to take it to the house. Yes, they were called back, but he still was able to put that on film. Who can teach our young guy, and then when we feel comfortable enough with McCray, whenever that happens to be, perhaps it's an entire year, perhaps it's a shorter timeline than that, then we have the next guy in the pipeline. That's how it should work in great businesses, and then especially in football. You need to have that next up-and-coming player, especially even if an injury happens. You want that next man up type of mentality, even though it's become so cliche.
I think I could address the Mario Alford thing. I think the reason why so many fans were wanting a change is because they feel like Mario Alford, and I don't think this is necessarily reasonable, but when emotions run this high, people generally aren't reasonable. I think a lot of Rider fans feel like he cost them the Labor Day Classic, which, other than playoffs, is the most important game of the year. Remember, that was the game that he had the muff punt return, the ball hit, I think it was his leg or his hand, and Winnipeg recovered it for a touchdown, and then narrowly won the game after Zach Collaros was out for the whole second half due to injury. So if you, as a returner, make that kind of mistake in the most important game of the year, I can understand why Rider fans are so excited about the next guy. Yes, he has had, I think it's 8 return touchdowns in 3 years, which is pretty remarkable, but I think it's hard to overcome that kind of mistake in what many can consider the biggest game of the year. That being said, before we leave this topic, gentlemen, I think that we should talk about our picks for breakout player of the year. This week, in this little tease, we've got a few predictions articles coming out of 3 Down Nation, not just from the 3 of us, but from all of our wonderful contributors coast to coast. We're really excited to bring you these picks. Last year, our contributors picked breakout candidates, including Drew Brown, Charleston Rambo, Khalil Pimpleton, Keyshawn Johnson, Jalen Philpott. Like, a lot of these guys aged well and became, were then either backups or rookies, unknowns. They are now guys who most CFL fans will know the names of. I'm curious, who are your picks, gentlemen, for guys who could be that in 2025? Players who right now, maybe they're not necessarily rookies, but they're guys who have been backups, guys who've been rotational guys, special teamers, who you think will become potential stars this season.
There are lots of candidates in this category, and I think this is going to be a great year for newcomers in the CFL just across the board. But I'll highlight a couple of guys off the top. First of all, we just spent a bunch of time talking about the return situation in Saskatchewan, but another team that was looking to upgrade their return situation is the BC Lions. And I think they've found somebody who can contribute both on special teams and on offense in rookie receiver Jermaine Jackson out of Idaho. This guy's 5'7". He's not very big, but in both the preseason games, he was absolutely sensational when he played. And you saw him go up and get a big high ball from Nathan Rourke over the middle with Royce Metier bearing down on him in that second game. I think they like this kid a whole heck of a lot, and he could potentially upgrade two areas that BC badly needed some new talent in. The other guy that I'm going to highlight is somebody who's returning for a second season out in Winnipeg, Devin Adams, their fantastic defensive lineman. You know, he had some production last year in more of a rotational role, sort of couldn't hold down the starting spot. But every time I turned my head in preseason, it seemed like this guy was in the backfield making a play, getting a sack, stuffing a running back. He's 285 pounds, but he can rush off the edge. That's not a skill set that we see a lot in the CFL. And the guys who are that large who can do inside and outside are typically stars like a Jake Serezna or Anthony Lanier in his prime. It's a valued skill set, and I think Devin Adams can legitimately do that. I don't know that he's going to be the day one starter in Winnipeg, but I think he's going to take a big year two jump, and I think we're going to see a lot more production from him as he gets more comfortable in the CFL game.
Let the record show that John Hodge tried to shove a Saskatchewan Roughriders player down my throat for this segment, okay? And I think that player could be good. But before we get to him, I wanted to note, thank you, boys, for giving me Derek Parrish, but I want to start with Mayan Williams, who I think has immense upside. The Argos obviously really high on him, releasing Kadeem Carey to keep this guy around along with some others at the running back position. But to me, I think this is the best guy within this offense to have a breakout season. He's a dude that I think has elite game-changing ability, but that has to be realized on the field. We saw glimpses of it during the preseason. Now he's got to ratchet it up to the next level in the regular season when the games actually count. And then the aforementioned Parrish had 6 sacks last year, but he's going to start this year, be a full-time guy coming off the edge. I think he has a chance to, potentially be, let's say, an East Division All-Star if he keeps on that pace from last year that he had with 6 sacks. So we'll see how he does.
Great
Again,
pressure
it's
numbers
different.
too.
You referencing the analytics, of course.
Always tough.
And I agree. So it's different, though, going from being a rotational guy to the guy. Let's look at a Brandon Barlow, who was a rotational guy, got signed as a free agent, but hasn't become a consistent every down player in this league, if I could speak today, in terms of threatening the quarterback. Parrish has a chance to be that guy. So I think 2 guys with real big-time upside for the Argos. And then the Riders guy, who I think is a bit more of a long shot for a number of reasons that I'll try to lay out quickly, is Joe Robustelli. So he's had an unbelievable story, was out of football, came back to it. Actually, Javon Holland was an impetus in this, telling him that he felt like he could compete, at the NFL level, and now here he is in the CFL. I think it's going to be difficult for him to crack the roster just when you look at potentially how the Riders are going to deploy their ratio. So Dante Myers and Keyshawn Johnson are going to start in that receiving group. And then you have Sean Bain Jr. working back from injury. But if the Riders have to start 3 Canadians in the receiver group, or I should say decide to start, then it's hard to see Robustelli, getting on the roster, because the next guy is an American right now who backs up is Mario Alford, because he's the returner and the backup receiver. So you have to see an injury or them change the ratio. And then if Bain Jr. gets hurt, you see him come back into the mix. But the reason that I think Robustelli has this upside is because Trevor Harris compared him to Greg Ellingson. And I think from a body type perspective, it makes a lot of sense. Harris also believes that he's an elite level athlete, which was on display in the preseason, caught 6 balls for 119 yards in that final preseason game against Winnipeg. So a lot of the intangibles are there. By all accounts, from what I've heard, the work ethic is there with Robustelli. He's just going to have to find a way to get his opportunity with some other talented Americans slotted above him at the moment in the Riders receiver group.
My 2 players are Travis Teese of the Montreal Alouettes and Devin Barasuk of the Hamilton Tiger Cats. We'll start with Teese. Teese first caught my attention in the preseason with Montreal as a returner. A bit of a weird returner body. Like, this is a guy who as a running back is 5'9", about 217 pounds. So a thick runner, but he was outrunning angles, making people miss. And then he could also put his helmet and his shoulder down and absolutely run through people. And that was one of the things I saw him do in the second preseason game on a little outlet pass, the kind that Walter Fletcher is going to catch or would have caught 60 times this year. And he turns upfield, outruns an angle, runs through a guy, and turns what would have been a 0 or maybe a 1 yard gain into like a 15, 16, 17 yard gain and a first down. Like, that type of elusiveness combined with that type of physicality is rare. It almost reminded me a little bit of like an AJ Ouellette or maybe like a Brandon Sutton. If you guys remember Brandon Sutton, the kind of short, stocky running back who played in Montreal. So I think that is a guy to watch for sure. We don't know if he'll be the game 1 starter, as Montreal has another American running back on the roster, but regardless, I think Teese will play a lot, whether it's at running back, whether it's contributing as...
You're talking about Tyrell Sutton. Is that who you mean?
Tyrell Sutton. Who's Brandon Sutton?
Don't know.
Yes, Tyrell Sutton. Wesley Sutton is another active player who is on the Alouettes. So now that we've covered all the Suttons, yes, sorry, Tyrell Sutton.
Who's Brandon Sutton, though?
I'll have to Google it.
There was another Alouettes running back with Brandon as a first name, wasn't there?
Yes, there was.
Around that same time. I think you're melding
Brandon
two players.
Rutley. Brandon Rutley.
Yes, yeah. You're smushing them together into one.
Yeah, there is no Brandon Sutton. Okay, well, now that I'm done inventing people, I'll get back to my point.
Actually,
I think
hold on. There is a Brandon Sutton.
Is there?
Who's an all-conference running back for Central Piedmont 4A high school football, it looks like.
Well, bring him in. There's so many running backs. He's the next guy.
Buddy, you're just predicting the future. Next CFL star at running back.
Yeah, when it comes time to cut Travis Teese, we'll bring in Brandon Sutton.
Well, if he's in high school, that's like 6 or 7 years away. So that's a pretty good running back career. The other guy I'll touch on is Devin Barasuk. I just thought he had a couple of absolutely sensational special teams tackles. And I know that special teams is not the sexiest thing in the world, but special teams legitimately matters in Canadian football. Unlike a lot of the action you see down south, it is a true third part of the game, true third facet. And Barasuk is just such a mismatch, right? From a physical standpoint, he's got sub 4.5 speed at 6'2.5" and 235 pounds. I remember speaking to somebody before the draft who said, well, I think what the Tiger Cats should do is take Devin Barasuk second overall and start him at middle linebacker. And I don't think he's necessarily the day 1 starter at middle linebacker. But what I do think Devin Barasuk is a guy who can lead the CFL in special teams tackles as a rookie. There'll be a few guys competing for that same spot. I think Jack Cassar in Toronto could potentially be up for that. I think Michael Ayers in Winnipeg could potentially be up for that. I think AJ Allen could potentially be up for that in Saskatchewan. But Devin Barasuk, a very important part of the game. I don't think Hamilton's special teams cover units were very good last year. I think Devin Barasuk is absolutely going to upgrade those spots immediately, while also potentially even working his way into a starting role with the Tiger Cats as the number 2 overall pick out of the University of Windsor.
Yeah, I don't think you can discount him as a day 1 starter, Hodge, especially with the ability to potentially, manipulate the nationalized American rule there with Kyle Wilson and do some rotation. You look elsewhere, like where are they going to find a 7th Canadian starter in Hamilton? Because I assumed they were going to do a defensive line rotation, but Kyle Sampson and Ty Anderson are both on the PR, so they can't do it with an interior guy. Are you starting Owen Hubert or Isaiah Bagna? You drafted Devin Verusuk over Isaiah Bagna, so presumably you want him on the field first. I think he could legitimately get defensive reps. Now, is he ready for that? I'm not sure he is, but boy, oh boy, did he flash, to your point, on those special teams tackles. He is going to be a problem for coordinators that they are going to have to account for.
I suspect, by the way, that Sherman Harrison Bagyogo might be in the mix, a corner, if they're looking for a seventh starter. But yes, I have done the same math, and looking at their roster, I have had the same thought that looking at their depth chart, there's a lot to like, but there's also some work to be done, I think, long term in terms of building that Canadian talent.
3 Down Nation unveiled fresh regular season CFL power rankings entering week 1. Montreal took the top spot, followed by Winnipeg, Saskatchewan, then Toronto, Ottawa, Edmonton, Hamilton, BC, and Calgary taking up the rear. What did we get right? And what did we get wrong, gentlemen?
I think the one that was wrong that stands out to me, fellas, is having the Hamilton Tiger Cats over the BC Lions. There's a number of reasons for it, but you look at Nathan Rourke, I think that he is going to get back more towards the 2022 form. Is he going to get to that record-breaking level again? That's a very high bar to reach. I think it's possible, but I think with him locked in there, having a full off season, based on what I've heard from talking to people around the team and veteran players there, he's an absolute alpha dog as a leader. And I think that at least to start the season, I would have BC ahead of the Hamilton Tiger Cats. You know, it's tough at the top of the rankings too, fellas. Like, I want to give the 3 Down Nation contributors credit for these power rankings, but having the Montreal Alouettes number 1 with Davis Alexander as their quarterback with the way he looked in preseason is a question to me. But then you look at the Alouettes' history, right? They've won the Grey Cup in 2023. They were the top team in the East in 2024. Yes, they got upset by the Toronto Argonauts, who then went on to win the Grey Cup. But I think Danny Machocha and Jason Moss have shown that they are a great tandem together and that they can develop new players and just keep on rolling. We've seen it at multiple spots. So I get why they're at 1, but also I think you can poke at least one major hole in it with Davis Alexander until he proves that he can be a game in, game out, high-level starter in the league.
Yeah, and I will say this. I had Montreal as my number 1 team, and I had Calgary as my number 9 team. So my ballot turned out correct at the top and the bottom, or at least it was the consensus. That being said, I don't think there's necessarily that much that really separates those two teams. Like, yes, I think that Montreal deserves to be number 1. Yes, I think Calgary deserves to be number 9. And if they played head-to-head right now, I'd pick Montreal to win it, even if it was at McMahon Stadium. That being said, I think that this is the most parity we've seen, certainly since the COVID-19 pandemic, and arguably in the better part of a decade. Like, there's a lot to like about Calgary in terms of Vernon Adams Jr. I think their offensive line is solid. I think their receiving core is much improved. I think they're going to be able to run the ball at least decently with Dedrick Mills. And on defense, I think the addition of Falarin Rumalade, very sharp at defensive end. And in the middle, I think Miles Brown is going to be able to provide a little more push in the middle than they've had. I've got some questions about the secondary. I've got some questions about the return game. I've got some questions about the linebacking core. But we all know Rene Paredes is probably going to the Hall of Fame, right? So the kicking game is going to be fine. So I think Calgary, even though they were a 5-win, 6-win team last year, I still think they're better. I don't know if they're a 9-win team. I'd probably have them in the 7 to 8 range. But if they're the best, or pardon me, if they're the worst team in the league and they're going to win 7 or 8 games, that's, I think, a testament to how much parity we have. And likewise, Montreal, they were a 12, 13-win team last year, right, with a tie. To me, I'd probably peg him at like 11 wins, maybe 12. I agree. Davis Alexander has some stuff to prove, but McLeod Bethel-Thompson, also, his statistics were very good at Edmonton last year. I just think the defense let that team down a little bit. So I think if they have to pivot to McLeod Bethel-Thompson, they're going to be just fine there as well. And I like a lot of what they've got. They've got a good receiving core. I think Austin Mack is going to get back to some 2023 level things that we saw him do. The offensive line is still solid. Travis Teese, whether it's him, whether it's Scott in the backfield, I think they're going to be fine there. The defensive line is excellent, especially with Mustafa Johnson getting healthy at some point. Linebacking core is arguably the best in the CFL. And then the secondary is good, right? The kicking game, they're solid. James Litcher Jr. is great. Like, my point is, from 1 to 9, we might only see a difference of maybe 5 wins this year, which makes power rankings extremely difficult. So, yes, I think these power rankings are valid. I hear what Dunk is saying about BC over Hamilton potentially. To me, the BC Lions have the lowest floor in the CFL.
Mhm.
If Nathan Rourke struggles, if he gets hurt, I think that they could be a 5-6 win team. If Nathan Rourke is great, he could will them to a home playoff game. I think he is legitimately that good. I think he could pull them like an ox before the cart, just powering them to 11 wins, 12 wins even. But I think for right now, this is good. I think there's honestly 4 teams that are capable of winning the East. I don't think Calgary is capable of finishing first, but I do think they're capable of making the playoffs. Every other team in the West, I think could win. I think Edmonton could finish first. I think BC. I think it could be Saskatchewan. I think it could be Winnipeg. Saskatchewan, by the way, I will say, would have been my number 1 team, but the offensive line is scaring me. I don't know how well they're going to be able to run the football. There's a reason they brought in Sean McHugh, and I talked about this on the pregame show on CKRM Dunk. They brought in Philippe Gagnon for a reason. They drafted Eric Anderson for a reason, and those guys are likely not going to be available, any of them, for the entire season. So that, to me, bumps them down. If they had those guys, I had them number 1 on my ballot after free agency. Now I had them number 3.
I was in the same boat with you, Hodge, in terms of having the Montreal Alouettes number 1. I think they've got a great insurance policy at
That's
quarterback.
cute. You guys are paddling together in a boat.
It's real
some of
romantic.
us-
We got a little picnic too in the center.
Oh, JC,
You
be
feed
honest.
each other
It is.
cheese and grapes?
Hold
Oh, yeah.
on. Let's be honest. Between the 2 of us, it's not a little picnic. This is a picnic for 4 or 5 people that we are eating, the 2 of us. And I was going to say, Doug, if you want to chirp about our ballots, maybe you should actually complete yours.
Oh, he went there. For the record,
You're not supposed to pull the curtain back, Hodge. Shut up.
I
Doug
thought
hates
that's what we do
ranking
here.
Oh man. No, I had Montreal number 1, and I will disagree with your assessment a little bit here, Dunk, because I had BC at 9, and I had them there because I believe they have the lowest floor of any team in the CFL right now. I'm a full believer that Nathan Rourke is going to return to form. I really am. I think he looks great. He looked great in preseason. He's done all the right things this offseason. But have they done enough around him to make that team better? I don't know. Until I see it in action, I just have a lot of question marks around that team in terms of the quality of some of their receivers, in terms of their defense, whether it's going to be any good. Can we get a consistent pass rush? They haven't really found anybody there. Are they going to be better in the secondary? And then the offensive line, like all 3 guys that could have potentially started at right guard as Canadians, they're all hurt right now going into week 1. They might be playing 4 Americans on the offensive line, which is absolutely ridiculous when you think about it based on the history of the CFL. But they've got some real issues there. And John Allen, who came in to improve that unit, and I hope will be able to do that, missed a big chunk of training camp with back problems. So it still remains to be seen how healthy he's going to be and for how long in the season. Played that last preseason game, but there are still question marks there. So lots of concerns in BC. The 2 teams I think are way too low on people's ballots are the Ottawa Redblacks and the Edmonton Elks. Look, Edmonton, I know it's unproven at this stage, and there are questions, but look how much talent they brought in, right? By talent alone, particularly on the defensive side of the ball, this is not only a playoff team, but a Grey Cup contender, and they should be far higher on this list, in my opinion. And then the Ottawa Redblacks have a dynamic receiving core with Eugene Lewis, who some people have argued is the best receiver in the CFL, Justin Hardy, who finished second in yardage last year, And Khalil Pimpleton, who, to be frank, guys, and I'll give a little bit of a spoiler, I have as a dark horse candidate for MOP. I think he could have a Brandon Banks type of season if he keeps showing us what he did last year, because, hey, his OC is the same guy who got Brandon Banks to that level, and they play a very similar game. So I'm high on that Ottawa offense. And, well, I'm not sure they've answered all the questions in the secondary. They've still got Darius Pickett, who looks like he's going to be healthy for week 1. And they've got two of the best American pass rushers in the league, in Lorenzo Malden and Bryce Carter coming off the edge, which covers up for a lot of flaws. So I'm really high on the Redblacks, and I don't know why our team actually dropped them down the ballot based on where we had them post-free agency.
It's now time for Hodge's Heritage Moment. On this day in 2023, the Calgary Stampeders released veteran left tackle Derek Dennis. The native of Queens, New York, was in his third stint with the team after previously helping the Stampeders win a Grey Cup, also capturing the league's most outstanding offensive lineman award, and twice being named All-CFL. Dennis never played again in the CFL following his release from Calgary, but attended training camp with the Edmonton Elks as a guest coach this year. JC, how do you remember Dennis?
I remember Bone Crusher fondly, not only as a dominant player, but also as a guy who, among CFL players, was probably the most likely to take you to task on social media if you ever said something critical about his team or his play or he didn't like it. He'd have a discourse with you. And I got into a lot of back and forth with Dennis back in the day. And, they were always cordial, to his credit. Even though he would push back and he'd disagree with you, it never got mean or ugly like it sometimes does with players when that happens. So I have a lot of respect for Dennis in that regard. I think he's a super smart guy. I know why he's in Edmonton as the guest coach, or why he was in Edmonton, because of those coaching staff connections. I just find it a little bit hilarious that it is, considering how his first go around with Edmonton as a player ended after a very brief tenure.
Let's go to the 3-minute drill. Hodge, 3 Down Nation is unveiling its picks for year-end awards. Are you taking Zach Collaros or Brady Oliveira? Let me think about this for a second. Are you going to take Zach Collaros and Brady Oliveira to win joint MOP? That's what I was trying to say.
No, my pick for MOP is Nathan Rourke.
Come on, history, bro. Joint MOPs. It will be interesting. Get on the bandwagon. Row in the boat with me. You're rowing with JC. I'm jealous. I got FOMO.
Well, the issue is the lunch that JC packed includes processed meats and an entire loaf of bread, and the lunch bag that you packed is quinoa and cucumbers. So it was an easy choice for me as to which lunch I would enjoy.
Peanut butter. As for only peanuts in my peanut butter.
I don't eat peanut butter, so that is not helpful for me at all.
Only peanuts? Like, what?
Just peanuts, peanut butter, bro. Work? Don't eat the Kraft garbage, okay? Sorry, Kraft.
I don't eat any peanut butter.
Well, we've just blown our valuable Kraft sponsorship for the podcast, Doug. I hope you're happy.
Yeah, this segment brought to you craftily by Kraft. Enjoy Kraft peanut butter that is not full of crap.
Except Hodge doesn't eat peanut butter. So that killed our chance anyways. Double kill.
Fair
Kraft does other things. They make, Kraft singles. That can be a mean grilled cheese, right?
That's true.
I might
You need real farm cheese, boys. Have you ever had real farm cheese? We make it out at Dunk Farms. Well, actually, they hire people to come out and do it. But straight from the cow's teat to your mouth, farm cheese. Get it in you.
We are so off the rails. I also, from a legal standpoint, want to state that, no, this is not sponsored by Kraft, and we are also not officially endorsing the consumption of unprocessed dairy milk. So we are not doing any of those things. Please do not file a lawsuit against us.
Bro.
You said straight from the cow's teat to your mouth.
It's better that way. Do some research.
Justin Dunk is not a doctor, nor is he providing medical advice. As for my MOP pick, my pick is Nathan Rourke. I do think that will be a tough vote for people if the Lions miss the playoffs. For example, Bo Levi Mitchell in 2024. But if the Lions make the playoffs, I think Rourke will be the MOP of the CFL in 2025. JC, you created Team 10, comprised completely of final cuts from around the league this weekend. If this was a real CFL team, how many games would it win?
I think it would win one game. Let's be frank, gentlemen. There's some talent on this team at running back. Alexander Hollins could be a receiving threat, but it's thin on the offensive line, and that box is paper thin. There are no linebackers and no viable defensive linemen. I don't think we're going to be able to stop the run at all whatsoever. So this team is not winning very many games. Mario Alford kept his job as Saskatchewan's returner despite strong competition from Dre McRae. This is a throwback to earlier in the show. Was that expected, Dunk?
Depends who you talk to, but why are you laughing, JC? You still
Covered the
laughing at
topic.
farm cheese? You don't want none of that?
I'd love some farm cheese, Dunk. As long as it's coming from a cow, the way you phrased it initially, I was not entirely sure about this strange Dunk cheese.
It ain't strange, bro. It's elite. Perhaps we should get Dunk Farms as a sponsor. Anyways, yeah, it depends who you talk to as to if it was expected. I think it makes sense the way that it played out. Go back and listen. If you missed it to the first part of the show, we broke it down in more detail. The CFL and its teams invested $4.5 million in amateur football throughout 2024. That's a lot of cash, ain't it, Hodge?
Yes, and it's very cool. If this sport is going to grow, if you want young people to come to CFL games, this is a necessity. So thank you and kudos to the CFL and its member clubs for this investment. Hopefully this number continues growing in the future.
You could buy a lot of cheese with $4.5 million.
Should we really be encouraging JC to eat cheese? That feels like cannibalism.
His nickname is Jumbo Cheese.
Yeah, and that's why it's cannibalism if he eats cheese. 2 of Saturday's preseason games. But he is cheese.
Neither is cannibalism. Cannibalism isn't people eating themselves. It's eating the same
people
thing that they are.
Other people.
Yeah. Eating from the same species. So if I am cheese and I eat cheese, it's cannibalism.
This is the worst 3-minute drill ever. It's also going to be about 17 minutes long. 2 of Saturday's preseason games were delayed, one due to thunderstorms and one due to smoke. Our 3-minute drills becoming delayed by giggles right now. Will this be a sign of things to come this summer?
I think it will, and it's a sign of things to come for the future. We've gotten more and more smoke delays and games put in jeopardy every season. Wildfires aren't going to become less of an issue with climate change and the situation we're in as a human race.
Make it political.
So I'm not making it political. There's a lot more wildfires than there used to be, and there's a lot more smoke, and that puts games in jeopardy. So the CFL needs to be proactive. I think they need to focus on their weather delay policy, and I think any future stadiums need to be roofed because we don't have that problem out in BC, despite the fact that it gets real smoky out in this neck of the woods. Chad Kelly has been cleared for practice leading into week 1. Will he suit up for Toronto's regular season opener in Montreal?
I doubt it. There's probably a small chance, but, if you're Chad Kelly, and especially the people around him, do you want him to have potentially his first game that he's even dressing to go back to the place where he snapped his 2 leg bones? Like, that would not be a good situation. I think it's a low chance if he dresses in week 1. The BC Lions have surpassed 50,000 tickets for the team's home opener on Saturday. Could it reach a full sellout, JC?
I believe it will. Those tickets are dropping like they're hot because Snoop Dogg is going to be in the house. And, I guess I was wrong in the last segment when I said that we don't have problems with smoke in BC Place because with Snoop Dogg performing, there might be some air quality issues in the building, but it's going to be a hell of a show.
That is too funny. On behalf of Justin Dunk and JC Abbott, we thank you and apologize for joining us for this episode of the 3 Down Nation podcast. Enjoy week 1. We will be back, JC and myself, for our picks in week 1. Enjoy it. Stay tuned to 3downnation.com.
You got to tell the people, subscribe, like, follow us on social, all that good stuff.
Buy some farm cheese, all that stuff. Let's do it. Week 1. Let's go.